Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Toxic Substances Control's public listening session for groundwater at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. This listening session is designed to provide interested stakeholders with the opportunity to ask questions, provide input, and elevate SSFL groundwater topics of interest to include in a series of upcoming groundwater educational workshops. My name is Jamie Slaughter, and I am the Public Participation and Community Outreach Manager for SSFL at DTSC and will be facilitating this meeting. On behalf of DTSC, we are glad you are all participating today. The Department of Toxic Substances Control's mission is to protect California's people, communities, and environment from toxic substances, to enhance economic vitality by restoring contaminated land, and to compel manufacturers to make safer consumer products. The agenda for this meeting includes an overview of the purpose and format for this listening session, an overview of the SSFL site, including the areas of responsibility for the responsible parties and groundwater conditions at SSFL, an open forum listening session, dates for the upcoming workshops and site visit, anticipated upcoming groundwater decision documents and associated comment periods, and how to stay connected or submit any additional groundwater or other site-related questions. The purpose of this listening session is to actively listen and gather public input on groundwater questions, topics of interest, and concerns that you would want to learn about at the upcoming groundwater workshops, and to understand how to prepare you, the public, for upcoming groundwater decision documents, comment periods, and associated public meetings. First, I will briefly present groundwater conditions at SSFL, compiled by our DTSC technical team, followed by an open forum to hear from you. You may type questions into the Q&A section that you can access through your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen throughout the meeting. DTSC staff will limit our typed and verbal responses this evening to listen to your questions and input, so that way we can meaningfully respond through future workshops, meetings, and other communication work products such as FAQs, web page content, cleanup plans, or presentations and documents. Our goal tonight is to listen to you and understand your concerns. This slide shows the dates and topics for the upcoming groundwater workshops and site visit. You can visit the DTSC events page to register for the workshops that will be held on Zoom. The site visit will be held at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory site, and all visitors must register to be admitted. As we progress through the slides, please prepare any groundwater topics or questions that you would like to share during the open forum. Additionally, you may use the Q&A feature in your Zoom menu to type questions or topics of concern related to groundwater. We will compile all survey responses and listening session input to inform our planning for upcoming engagement activities. DTSC previously mailed and emailed groundwater community updates and included a survey. You can access these documents by visiting the DTSC SSFL webpage. The survey will also remain live through the workshop series. All stakeholder input received through the groundwater survey and this listening session will be considered for the development of the workshop content, upcoming groundwater decision document meeting materials, webpage FAQs, future meetings and workshops, or other relevant work products and communications. Tonight, we ask that you please remain courteous to all meeting attendees. This meeting is being recorded and you may be muted if necessary. When providing input or asking questions, please state your name and affiliation and speak clearly and at an even pace. You may type questions or input into the Q&A section throughout the meeting. We are not limiting stakeholders to a time limit for this meeting to provide input. However, we ask that you please remain courteous and consider other attendees who may also have input to share. The Santa Susana Field Laboratory is a 2,849-acre site overlooking Simi Valley to the north and northwest and the San Fernando Valley to the southeast. The site is located in the Simi Hills area of Ventura County, approximately 30 miles northwest of downtown Los Angeles. SSFL is a former complex of scientific research, development, and testing facilities where operational activities began in 1948 and ended in 2006. This slide lists some frequently used acronyms that you may see in DTSC presentations, documents, or website related to groundwater. The Santa Susana Field Laboratory consists of 4 administrative areas used for research, development, and test operations, as well as undeveloped buffer areas. The Boeing Company, Boeing, the U.S. Department of Energy, DOE, and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, are identified as the 3 responsible parties for this site. This slide clearly defines the responsible parties' administrative areas for soil cleanup. However, there is some overlap and shared responsibility for groundwater cleanup. For example, between Boeing and DOE in Area 4. In the 1950s, 18 water supply wells were drilled at SSFL to support site operations. These wells are no longer in operation. Water level and groundwater quality samples have been collected from the water supply wells since installation. According to the records, chlorinated hydrocarbons were discovered in groundwater samples collected in the 1980s. The discovery of groundwater contamination prompted an extensive groundwater investigation beginning in the 1980s until now that have included, among other activities, the installation of more than 600 groundwater monitoring wells across the site and the identification and sampling of over 100 off-site seeps and springs around the periphery of the site. This was part of an extensive hydrogeologic and geologic investigation that included other activities such as geologic mapping, fracture analysis, analysis of aerial photos, borehole geophysics, and aquifer tests. Presented here is the most recent extent of the TCE and perchlorate groundwater plumes, which are the most ubiquitous and widespread at the site. Other contamination is generally contained within the footprints of the TCE plumes. This slide shows a recap of the data for chemicals of concern received from the groundwater survey for question number 23. Again, the survey will remain live throughout the workshop series. You can access the survey from the DTSC SSFL web homepage to submit any additional groundwater input after this listening session and throughout the workshop series. While we will receive input during this listening session, many questions regarding groundwater can be asked and will be answered during workshop 1, migration of chemicals at workshop 2, and remediation or cleanup technologies and approaches at workshop number 3. All workshops will begin with a short presentation, followed by a Q&A portion where DTSC and the responsible parties will respond to questions. DTSC will provide responses to some questions typed into the Q&A section tonight that you can access in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. All participants will be able to view any questions asked, as well as DTSC responses. Please keep in mind that some elevated topics may be addressed in the groundwater workshops, future meetings, or other communication work products, such as FAQs, web page content, cleanup plans, or other presentations and documents. We will now begin the listening session portion of this meeting. As a reminder, the purpose of this listening session is for DTSC to actively listen and gather public input. DTSC staff will limit our responses so that way we may hear public interests, concerns, and topics related to groundwater at SSFL. As a reminder, tonight we ask that you please be courteous to all meeting attendees. This meeting will be recorded and you will be muted if necessary. When providing input or asking questions, please remember to state your name and affiliation and speak clearly and at an even pace. You may also type questions or input into the Q&A section. We are not limiting stakeholders to a time limit. However, we do ask that you please remain courteous and consider other attendees who may also have questions and input to share. If you are calling in, you can press *6 to mute or unmute yourself. And you can also press *9 to raise or lower your hand. And if you would like to type questions into the Q&A section, you can do that at the bottom of your screen. And we will now go ahead and begin the listening session. And Valisa, who is my co-host, will assist with helping to cycle people through the line. And then we have our technical staff here on hand to assist with anything that may be needed. So we'll go ahead and take the first person. Valisa, who would be our first person that we have that has input or a question?
Hey, Jamie. Yes, we have Julie Korenstein. She has her hand raised. If you can come off mute and state your name and affiliation.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there was no way for me to unmute myself. All right. Julie Kornstein. I am a community member. I live in the San Fernando Valley and have been very involved with the whole Santa Susana Field Lab site, probably for the last 30 or 40 years, if not longer, and have been very concerned and worried about it for so many reasons. Now, my granddaughter and her husband and a new baby just moved into Simi Valley. So my concern is even greater in terms of the drinking water. I'm just looking at the chart that I took a picture of up on the screen with all of the different contaminants, the carcinogens, the radionuclides, VOCs, etc. And I guess we're going to ask questions. I'm not sure you're going to answer them tonight, but I want to know where all of these chemicals and radioactive materials, how do they leave the site? Where do they go? What waterways do they get into? What is the impact on drinking water, very specifically Simi Valley? So those are my questions. Are you answering anything now, or you're just taking this down?
We are taking this down. So in workshop 1 will be just general hydrogeology, and then in workshop 2 will be the chemical fate and transport. So the constituents, if they are migrating, where and how and what they are. But I'm taking notes, and our project technical team is also taking notes, and I did write that down.
Okay, I see a chart which is obviously very scary and disconcerting. It's not really a shock or surprise because I've seen so much information through the years, but I don't understand really where all of this is going and how is it getting there? And does it get into any of the water supply, either for the East Simi Valley or the West Simi Valley? I understand there's 2 separate water districts. And I have been told that the Golden State Water District, which is, I guess, where the SSFLA is in or nearby, that they actually are recommending that houses use bottled water. I haven't heard exactly the same for the West Simi Valley, but I mean, my concern obviously is what is going to happen with all of these chemicals and what is the impact on drinking water?
So for the chemicals here on this slide, in the survey for question 23, the question was, what chemical constituents are you interested in related to groundwater? So a lot of the feedback that we're going to take from this meeting is going to be to prepare stakeholders not only for the workshops to hear the responses and engage in discussion over groundwater, but also to prepare the public to comment on the groundwater decision document that are coming up. And so these are the chemicals of concern that stakeholders wrote into DTSC saying that they were interested in understanding. So they wanted to know about specific chemicals, and are they a problem? Are they not a problem? And if they are, how and why? And so this is just the data capture from the public and what the public said that they would like to learn about at the Groundwater U and in the upcoming public meetings for the groundwater CMSs, which are the corrective measure studies.
So at some point in the near future, you're going to be giving us information of, this is like, okay, we've identified it now. We know what we're worrying about. What's the next step?
So because of the PEIR that was released last year in July, we're now getting cleanup documents from the responsible parties. And before DTSC makes any decision on cleanup, we'll have public meetings for the public to comment on those documents. And then any changes that need to be made to the documents based on the public concern, interest, or input, DTSC will make those modifications. And so we really just want to ensure that the public knows how to engage on groundwater. And so that's because we're now going to have more cleanup documents coming forth. And so from this listening session and the survey, we're going to put the information into the workshops, into the upcoming meetings, but we might identify work products that maybe need to be modified or work products that don't exist yet. For example, if we get a lot of similar questions, we may determine that we need to do a fact sheet, or we may need to do add some sort of content into workshops that we're already planning for that are coming up in the future. So we're just going to take all of the data back and then determine how to best prepare the public for what it is that you all are going to tell us that you're interested in learning about.
Okay, it's not just learning about it, it's a guarantee that people will not become ill, or those who have already become ill because of the environmental problems in the area. You know, I need to know whether or not my granddaughter and her husband should be getting bottled water to make baby formula. I don't know that they should be using tap water. I mean, it's very simple what we need to know.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, thank you. And
if I could just respond really quickly. Hi, Julie. My name is Sarah Spinuzzi. I'm Office of Legal Counsel with DTSC. And I just wanted to let you know that for anybody who is on a public water supply, so that's almost everybody, unless your family or you are on a private well. If you're on any public water supply that serves more than, I think, like 7 people, your water provider is required by law under the Safe Drinking Water Act to notify you of any chemicals for which there are maximum contaminant levels. So anything that you would be concerned about in your drinking water, your water supplier is required to notify you, regardless of the source of that contamination. So if there was contamination in drinking water from your water provider, they would be required to provide you with written notice. That notice could be anything from a boil notice to a don't drink this, you need to consume only bottled water, it's safe to bathe. There's a variety of notices. To our knowledge, there are not any notices at this time, but if the water in your house or in your family's house is unsafe to drink when you are on public water supply, the Safe Drinking Water Act requires notification for any chemical that's over a maximum contaminant level.
thank you, Sarah. Julie, did you have anything additional that you want to add before we move to the next person?
Yeah, you know, I appreciate what the woman who just spoke. I don't have really that much confidence, you know. It's been too many years of contamination, and I don't feel that the public is really being protected, you know. So it doesn't leave me feeling any better. And I really don't know until we have some final resolution And I know that there's going to be the beginning of the cleanup, I think in the spring. Are you, in other words, are you in sync with the cleanup for Burn Pit 1 and what happens with water, et cetera, and all of that? I mean, is that a part of what you do as well?
I can comment on that, Julie. So we are expecting to receive the first groundwater cleanup documents from two of the parties this year in draft form, which will be subject to a public review and comment process. So that is the reason why we're having this Groundwater U, is so we can get questions from community members, community groups like yourself, so we can be sure to incorporate those and address those as part of the Groundwater U series. So your input is very important, and we want to hear it. But that, you're right, that is the reason why we are on path to get some groundwater cleanup decision documents in 2024. And we want to make sure that we're equipping people with the information they need and the understanding of groundwater so they can review those and comment on them.
I understand, but I'm wondering about if there's radioactive material, is that tested by the water companies and so forth? I know, I can't remember the woman's name that spoke a few minutes ago. You know, I mean, basically what I need to know, where is the contaminated water going? Okay, and I've been on so many different sessions, I can hardly put it all together. How does it impact the groundwater? What water systems, waterways does the materials get into, radioactive as well as chemical contamination? And is there any means for that water to get into drinking water? That's really my question.
Okay. Thank you for that. We will be addressing that in workshop 2 for contaminant, fate, and transport. And we also do monitoring reports for SSFL, and we do air, soil, and water. And if you, I know I'm familiar with you as a stakeholder, so I'm sure that you are familiar with the SSFL webpage. So if you do log on to the homepage, there's a couple of buckets that you could click on, and that also includes where you can sign up for the e-list, and you can get notifications whenever we do any project site updates. And also, if you want to email me, you can do that. And then if you have any additional questions, we can kind of get you some quicker answers so that you don't necessarily have to wait for that meeting, if you would like to do that as well.
What I would like, I get the information about your meeting tonight through someone else, but I would like to be on that email list that I get it directly from you. I did not get tonight's until this afternoon.
Okay. Do you have access to your Q&A at the bottom of your screen?
Yes.
Can you just type in your email address, and then I'll personally add you to the.
I will. All right. Thank you very much. I will.
Okay. And I also made a note to myself so I can make sure I do that. Thank you, Julie. Okay, Valisa, let's move on to the next person that has their hand raised. I'll let you choose the next person.
Yes, that is going to be Christina Walsh. Can you please unmute, state your name and your affiliation?
Hi, this is Christina Walsh. I am with landrelief.org, and I've been involved for more than 20 years. I've gone to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these meetings. The cleanup was supposed to be completed in 2017. And I have to say, I'm quite shocked, really. And I can't believe I can still be shocked, but you're taking a poll in a survey of what chemicals are of interest, and a huge chunk of that wheel that you showed that is now gone was radionuclides, which is very important to a lot of people. In the recent DTSC work notice relating to the Area 1 burn pit cleanup, which I don't know if it's happening already or is going to start now. But it says if radionuclides are found, and then in the report that was done more than a year earlier, it lists all of these radionuclides that were found. So when you see how interested people are in radionuclides, that's, you know, almost a quarter of this chart. And yet it doesn't even rate, it just says chemical constituents. And this is where, and also, I don't understand how it is even possible when this has impacted groundwater for more than half a century. And these chemical and radionuclide constituents have been found in Simi water wells. How can you tell us that we're going to be notified by our water companies when we have been following this for hundreds and hundreds of meetings, decades and decades? I used to make fun of Marie Mason 20 years ago when she said she had been involved for 20 years. And here we are, I've been involved now for another 20 years. And now you're asking whether we care or not, whether we're really going to do this. And that's, I'd like to hear your response, because it clearly states that these are above LUT values and they have already been found. So I don't understand how a work notice dated January 2024 can say, what if? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. So we can address that in the second groundwater workshop. And then I have made a note because we did have a question, and I wrote down your note for the connection between Area 1 burn pits cleanup that is getting ready to start. It hasn't started yet. So the reference to that work notice and the connection between groundwater, I did make that note.
But do you acknowledge that your work notice suggests that you don't know yet? And we've been watching you all study this stuff for decades and decades, and you know it is there. It says in your own report done by Boeing that it is there. But yet in these public sessions, it talk about a wheel, round and round and round, run around, that I think people are asking if it's safe to be here. And you're asking us which is our favorite chemical. And with a cancer cluster, a pediatric cancer cluster that is well identified and known, I just find it difficult to understand how this can ever relate to actual progress, making the site safer for all of us who live near the site and feel like time bombs.
Okay, I've made additional notes. That's for my project managers to respond to, and they're gonna be able to do that at those workshops because I'm not authorized to. I don't know how to answer that.
Christina, I'll take a crack at answering your questions. Steve Becker, I'm the branch chief for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory. Based on all the monitoring data to date in groundwater, surface water, which the Regional Water Quality Control Board oversees via an NPDES permit, air monitoring that's conducted, the end result is that, DTSC has not identified any constituents leaving the site at concentrations that would pose a threat or risk to human health or the environment. There may be low concentrations, but they're not at levels necessarily that are going to pose a risk to anyone. And I think the most prevalent pathway might be the surface water pathway, where once in a while there are exceedances from different high precipitation events and things like that. But that's the general result of all the monitoring that's been done, is that's what it's identifying. So when you're asking questions about the groundwater monitoring wells, I mean, as Sarah mentioned earlier, the local water purveyors are the ones that are legally responsible reporting out on those and ensuring that the water that is delivered to individuals' taps is safe to drink. With that said, with what I just said, basically, SSFL is, not contributing to those concentrations that are found within the basin. There are a lot of other sources of contamination that are out there within the basins.
With all due respect,
Yeah.
Surface water is a pathway that can affect people. There is a cancer cluster. Bell Creek, Santa Susana is the headwater to that. And instead of addressing that, there is a consistent and ongoing and repeating failure to sample water when it rains at outfall 2. So the people that cross with their horses, cross that creek every day, like I used to do for decades, I guess are just left with not being heard, because you're saying that there are no other exposure pathways when we had a recent fire that burned more than 70% of the site, and then that flowed down all of the drainages. So and more effort has been made to not sample where people are than anything else. So I just really don't understand how you can say that, but thank you for at least speaking to me.
Thank you. I think Sarah wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, hi, Christina. Thanks for your comments. I just want to make sure that I have noted a couple of your concerns very clearly. You have a concern about failure to sample stormwater at outfall 2. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then the other thing that you mentioned is you're concerned about surface water flowing offsite, or more particularly storm. Is that correct?
Yes, at the video of the water board visit to the site that I was not allowed to attend, the video showed a gentleman asking, is that Bell Canyon, those roofs over there? And the person leading the meeting said, water doesn't go that way, when we all know, including the NIPD's permit, that it does. So when that is how questions are answered, it isn't so strange that people like me are frustrated decades later.
So I hear that you're saying you're concerned about the direction that stormwater is flowing off site, and part of the purpose of this meeting is for us to understand what the public would like us to explain more about. And so I have written down that you're concerned about failure to sample at outfall 2, as well as concerns regarding the transport of pollutants from stormwater off site. Is that correct?
Yes, because the Area 1 burn pit flows to Bell Creek. So for everybody to say that they know without ever sampling that this is safe is impossible, because there's no sampling in Bell Creek. So thank you, and please write that down.
I did, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Steve and Sarah. Valisa, who is our next person that has their hand raised?
Yes, we have Chris Rowe. Chris, can you unmute and state your name and affiliation?
I currently don't have a professional affiliation. I am a former member of the West Hills Neighborhood Council. And at that time, I joined the committees of that entity back in 2006, and I became a technical stakeholder. I want to say the only people on this call that I really recognize are Paul Carpenter and Steve Becker. A lot of the others are new, but Paul goes back a very long time, so he should know who I am. So thanks for being here, Paul. What I'm surprised about is that Tom Seckington, since this is groundwater, is Tom, the first question would be, is Tom no longer doing groundwater at Santa Susana?
No, Tom is still here. He just wasn't available tonight.
Okay, so what I want to say is this. In around 2008, I was the vice chair of the Environment Committee. There were a lot of other names of that committee earlier. And Tom Seckington came and gave a presentation to the West Hills Neighborhood Council Environment Committee at that time. And what I want to say is I have a lot of confidence in the DTSC team because of my involvement going back to 2006 and then again starting in 2007, going to technical stakeholder meetings at the Chatsworth office, being on site with all the, depending on which part of the site we're at, being there with DTSC staff, whether it was Boeing, NASA, DOE, depending on which area we were in. I've been up there with the Boeing Expert Stormwater Panel. I was there in November for their meeting. That's the first time I've left my home since 2019. I attended the 2019 Stormwater meeting. So we did learn what the Boeing Expert Stormwater Panel is going to recommend for the Area 1 burn pit about diversion and stuff to try to prevent the water from going directly into Bell Canyon, Bell Creek. I mean, but what I would like to say is I think it would have been so important before this next meeting you're planning to have that we had the maps that I have seen over the years where you show the bound of the plume. So for example, back around 2008, I was with a team from DTSC and the NASA and Boeing and stuff, and we went across the street from Sage Ranch and they were doing core sampling and they showed us what core samples are like. And basically Tom Seckington said, this is where the end of the plume ends. And then at a later time, you guys, DTSC, when I say you guys, I apologize, did offsite sampling down by the mobile home parks to make sure that there wasn't contamination there. You also did sampling in Seepson Springs regularly in Woolsey Canyon and Dayton Canyon. And I know that Tom had access, although that was never made public. I believe he found out what was in a private groundwater well, which does not have to be disclosed, that's down off of Black Canyon behind Holly Huff's house. I also want to point out that there was a water board meeting in Simi Valley at least 4 or 5 years ago, where Tom presented for DTSC. Water board staff was there, Golden State, and Golden State's consultants were there, and they determined that the perchlorates that they were finding in the groundwater wells in Simi Valley were not the same types of perchlorates. They did a fingerprint analysis and they were not the same. They determined that they were either naturally occurring perchlorates or the type found in like Chilean fertilizers or other things like that. So one thing that I also would like to point out is that people use, they take their kids to see fireworks. A lot of the chemicals that are in fireworks are the same things that we're cleaning up at Santa Susana Field Lab. And they hold those fireworks shows, I believe, over the high school, and everybody's breathing them. Nobody thinks twice about taking their families to see fireworks that are public. But in reality, they are quite dangerous. And on the 4th of July, I tend to go to 4th of July events during the day, and I go home and I close my doors and have my air cleaners and my HEPA filters running because of the contaminants of concern that are some of the same things that you guys are asking to be cleaned up at Santa Susana. And finally, I want to say that, so for example, I know who Julie Korenstein is. I know her involvement in this site. Julie used to be on the Los Angeles Unified School District Board back when my kids were in elementary school, and I was very involved with my children's school. number one, so I know who she is. Number two, I want to point out that Christina Walsh, I'm also very familiar with Christina because Christina walked all of Area 4, just like I did with DTSC, DOE, the federal EPA and stuff like that, 2010 to 2012, and at other times. And she has contributed a lot to this site, so she has a lot of knowledge and worked very closely with DTSC when Norm Riley was the project manager there. But what I'm saying is that I want to conclude with the cancer cluster issue. A letter was sent to your draft EIR by Dr. Thomas Mack of USC Keck. Dr. Mack presented, and if you go into your public participation documents for meetings, April 2014, Dr. Mack looked at all of Ventura County and LA County, and he could not correlate cancer incidence with the Santa Susana Field Lab. And then later he was asked by Children's Hospital Los Angeles to look specifically at children's cancers around the site. They did an analysis of the census tracts around the SSFL site, and he came to the conclusion when he did that study prior to your draft EIS, and I think it was addressed to Barbara Lee. Was that one of your former DTSC? And the point is that then he forwarded that letter to me to submit as well. So the bottom line is he did not find. So you have to, in order to have an exposure, you have to have a pathway, a dose, and time. It's in other words, to have a potential carcinogen, it's dose, distance, and time. And so the question for all these people that claim their cancers are caused by Santa Susana, you know, and there's also genetics involved. It's so complex. So we cannot blame, and I don't usually bring this up, but because people post it on Facebook, I do have cancer. I've had surgery for cancer, and my cancer recurred. So what I'm saying is I'm speaking from a point of view of someone that's over 70 years of age, who's had cancer, who studies it with a bachelor's in health education, started my master's in public health, had a graduate level course in environmental health. So I am very, very involved in studying this. I was the one that brought Dr. Mack in, contacted the state cancer surveillance program and said, who can we get to look at Ventura County and LA County? They said, Dr. Mack already has the LA County data. We're going to send him the Ventura County data. That's how Dr. Mack became involved with Santa Susana. And so I just want you to know that he was the expert that had studied this. And also, Dr. Mack has put out a book in about 2021, I want to say. So he does, he's written 2 books on all of LA County cancer incidents, and he updated it in 2021 roughly. I bought it on Amazon, and when you look, he mentions cancers in children and there's so many hundreds of different types of cancers. I mean, the book is greater than a ream of paper. And bottom line is DTSC should have people that are looking at that, he has actual maps. And some of these cancers that you guys are concerned about, for example, you'll see higher incidence out in the Santa Clarita Valley. We know that skin cancers, you're going to see them closer to the oceans, or where people sit by their backyard pools and stuff like that. People that don't use sunscreens and stuff are greater risk for melanoma and stuff like that. So bottom line is there's so much misinformation, And that's why like people like Don Greenlee and stuff like that, that are toxicologists and stuff, we need people like that that can explain all these things to us, and that we can't correlate all our cancers, all of our autoimmune disorders, which I also have. We cannot correlate them all because of our own family histories, our own genetics and things like that. And I have had genetic testing, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. Valisa, who is our next person with their hands raised?
Yes, we have Eric Newman. Can you please unmute, state your name and your affiliation?
Hi, this is Eric Newman. I'm here with my wife, Melissa Yaspin, and we have recently moved in the last 5 years to Simi Valley. And it didn't come of interest to us till she was diagnosed with a breast cancer, and she was received treatment. And as I was taking care of her and still working to keep the house going, I ended up with a bladder cancer tumor of 4 centimeters. And I know it's kind of weird, but all of a sudden I started looking under the hood of what's going on here in Simi Valley, as well as West Hills, where I also spent time years back. And my wife was also in West Hills. And so all of this is of interest to us. And so I have a couple of questions which are kind of point to where we stand. And is there any way possible, we were talking about water and we're not sure whether, I know the water company is required to tell us if there's something wrong with our water, but what if they don't? What if, you know what I mean? There's always a weird, is there any way from our viewpoint, is there any ways that we can have our water tested? Is there any facilities, any places, any third-party companies, or is there going to be part of this whole investigation? Are they going to allow us access to have our water tested right out of our own tap and whatnot? We're trying to drink more bottled water. And so that's the number one question I have. And then I have one other question. Is there anybody doing health impact studies that we can get hold of? That we can, maybe there's some services, some help, because man, this is really tough having 2 cancers in the same household. And we don't have a lot of people to help take care of us. And is there anything in all the years that this has been kind of known about, any kind of organizations that are out there to help people like us? Even though, you know, there's no way to 100% prove it, maybe there's something already out there that we can gain assistance from.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. I made those notes, and I'll see if I can get some answers to that, and if we can respond to that during the workshops. But also, if you would like to go to our Santa Susana homepage, at the very bottom is the contact information for the SSFL site. And if you send me an email, then I can try to see if I can get some answers to that. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And then with respect, thanks, Eric, and thank you for sharing your story. And I hope that you and your wife are, you know, doing as well as you can. We're sorry to hear about that. With respect to your question about sampling water from your tap, I don't believe DTSC currently has any programs where we're testing water in people's homes. And the water providers also probably are not required to test water in people's homes. They typically test at the source, and they do have regular testing. I'm not sure on the frequency of testing for each and every chemical. But thank you for your feedback. And we also noted your other question regarding resources for health studies, and I don't know the answer to that right now, and I don't know if anybody else on my team does, or perhaps anybody else who's participating in this meeting right now, because I know you're not the only person who has a similar experience.
So thank you for your comments and thank you for your input, and we will work to address them.
Oh, you're unfrozen. Go ahead and finish. You froze at asking if anyone else had information or.
Ah, I'm sorry. I'm hearing that I'm having sound problems, and I apologize for that. I was just saying thank you for your comments, and we'll try to get back to you with a response on your questions.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Valisa, who is our next person with their hand raised?
Yes, we have Jeannie Knack. Jeannie, can you unmute and state your name and affiliation to ask your question?
Hi, my name is Jenny Knack. I'm with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab. I don't want to take up a ton of time, but unfortunately, and I'm hoping that Sarah, you'll stay on as legal counsel for DTSC, because when Julie Kornstein asked about the safety of drinking water, I think that we need to address division of drinking water, address the Simi Valley city, and admitted that at times they can use groundwater from Niles and Sycamore wells from any percentage, I think it was like 5 or 6 to 57% of water from those wells. And I understand that they are mandated to test quarterly for the regular list of constituents and analytes, but we do not know, and I don't believe that you know, but I would love to hear you say it on the record that you can assure Julie Kornstein that you know for a fact that they are testing when they are using up to 57% of water from those wells that the EPA has put into writing could be contaminated from SSFL groundwater. We do not have the information. Yes, Golden State is testing regularly as they're supposed to, but they admitted to stakeholders that they had only tested for tritium 2 or 3 times in over a decade. That's radioactive water that is unique to SSFL. So if you go to their website, they do not mention SSFL groundwater contamination as a potential source of contamination, even though the EPA has cited it as such. So I think it's interesting that you and Becker are comfortable assuring people with children or people with cancer in the home that drinking water is safe, because I am not sure that is true. And if you have evidence that they are testing when they are consistently, when they are using the maximum amount of groundwater from those wells in their residential drinking water blend, I think everyone on this call would be very interested in seeing that data. That isn't what I had originally raised my hand to discuss. And I don't want to take up a ton of time, but I guess one other subject separate from the drinking water subject is that in the 2011 Groundwater U's, the public was assured that the contamination plumes were stagnant, not moving. Contamination was not moving to seeps off-site. And again, Becker said that contaminants were not moving off-site in amounts over, concerns to public health, which in an independent study was shown after the Woolsey's fire to not be true. The hottest radioactive sample independently taken outside of DTSC's reassurances to the public was found 9 miles away from SSFL in Newbury Park. So my concern about these Groundwater U events is that we aren't given misinformation, and we want information that's consistent with the data that you've collected. So the 2023 groundwater reports show 8 analytes reported for the first time in wells, like in the history of your testing. There's 10 analytes reported at new maximum concentrations. So there will be people attending the Groundwater U sessions that aren't on this listening session. And I'm really hoping that we don't hear you give the same information that the contaminants in groundwater aren't moving and are staying put. Because in the 2011 slides, there was a slide that showed, there was a topic presented in the slides that discussing whether or not contamination was reaching the seeps, the groundwater that comes up through the ground after rain events. And there were slides showing that in Bell Canyon, yes, there were hits of contamination coming up through the seeps. But the summary of the conclusion of the slide said that no contamination was reaching the seeps. So I'm hoping that, and because we have the same presenters that we had in 2011, the same scientists, I'm hoping that the data that DTSC and the responsible parties have collected is consistent with their messaging. Because we shouldn't have to do tons of homework and research to get clear, accurate messages about the groundwater. And lastly, I know other people are waiting to speak, so I'm sorry, I'm trying to be quick and still speak clearly. I'm hoping that the Groundwater U sessions don't give tons of information that we don't need and focus heavily on remediation of contamination that we all know is there, is shown in your reports to be migrating, and discuss explicitly cleanup plans that rely not just on natural attenuation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. And Jenny, really quick, can you email me when you mentioned that the EPA said that
Yes.
some of the water was mixed?
I'll send you the link to the document, and I'll send you the video of the timestamp with the Division of Drinking Water stating it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I can send it all. Thanks.
And then I made notes on the other topics that you mentioned. So thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Valisa, do we have sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just going to respond because I think Jenny had asked that I stay on. Can you guys hear me first of all?
Yes.
Okay. I've had some feedback from other people that I'm difficult to hear. Jenny, thank you for your comments. My name is Sarah Spinuzzi. We haven't met yet. I have seen your videos and I am familiar with you, and I think we'll be meeting soon. So I look forward to meeting you in person one day. But to kind of respond with respect to your first comment about groundwater being mixed, DTSC does not deny that groundwater is groundwater in certain areas does not become part of your drinking water. The state of California has a very complicated water delivery system where sometimes your water can be imported from Northern California, mixed with your local groundwater aquifer. We're aware of that. We're not denying that. But what we are saying is that the contaminated plumes that are on site at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory are not the same aquifers that are being used for drinking water. And then, but I did want to make sure.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I understand that the plumes may not be reaching the Sycamore, Niles wells, but are you assuring the public right now that SSFL contamination in groundwater are not reaching those wells as the EPA has stated as possible?
Can you, Jamie, can you pull up the slide with the groundwater plumes? So Jenny, this is a map of the groundwater plumes at Santa Susana. You'll see that there's a trichloroethylene plume that has moved outside of the facility boundary. That is the only groundwater plume that is contaminated that has moved outside of the facility boundary.
Are you stating that no groundwater contamination exists outside of these plumes on this map?
I'm saying we don't have any data to support that. So, but you had a question, you had a couple of questions that I want to make sure that I understand you clearly, which is, and I want to make sure I understand this. So is one of your concerns that when the water provider, when Golden State is mixing water, that overlaps with the time when they're not doing their testing, their water quality testing?
No, because I think that they're always mixing water, and it's either a low percentage of the groundwater or a majority of water from those wells. And we do not know. If you know, I would love to see the data. what percentage of well water is used when they are doing the testing. Because if they're not showing,
I see.
if those tests are not representative of when they are using the majority of well water that the EPA states could be contaminated from SSFL groundwater, then we don't have a full picture.
Okay, so like what you're saying is that they could be mixing up to 57% groundwater or maybe 10% at some other times, but you want to make sure that when they're doing the water quality testing, that it's representative of when they're maximizing groundwater.
Correct, and that would be fair to the community.
Okay, I don't have that information, but I am writing that down as information that that you would like to know. And then
I don't want to cease and desist sent to me from Golden State, but as someone who's advocating for, I don't drink it. My family doesn't drink it, and we've talked with Julie, you know, who is obviously concerned. I just want to be sure that that no one is assuring public that it's safe to drink if we don't actually know.
okay, so yeah, and I don't know what they're monitoring and sampling. I don't know the timing of their monitoring and sampling requirements are off of the top of my head, but I've written that down as something to look into.
Okay, so would you then agree that it's not safe to assure the public blanketly that it's okay and safe? Because there are loopholes that might exist in terms of sampling the times.
It's not really our place to comment on Golden State's procedures. I mean,
but both of you have during this.
Hold on. The best source of information to find out how they're testing it, when they're testing it, and where they're testing it is going to be to talk to Golden State directly. They are the water purveyor. They can identify if they have contamination in their wells and if they're blending it and items like that.
And the last time we went in there, they met our group with armed guards, and 2 people received cease and desist letters. So there are serious intimidation tactics and interests on that private company to dissuade community members from doing too much investigative work. So before you assure people that it's safe, all I'm saying is there's no need to make the assurance because we don't know. And it's irresponsible of DTSC, their employees, or their legal counsel to make those reassurances. That's all I'm saying, and I don't mean any disrespect by it.
So Jenny, all I'm saying is that if they are, my understanding is that the Safe Drinking Water Act requires continuous and regular monitoring for water quality to make sure that your water is safe to drink. If they're not doing that, that's a violation of the safe drinking water. I can't speak for what they're doing. I just want to understand.
That's all I ask that you say when someone asks you is that you don't know.
One of your other comments is that they had only tested for tritium 2 or 3 times over the past 10 years. Did I get that written down correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Because I want to look into that as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny. Valisa, who is our next person with their hand raised?
Yes, we have Melissa Bumstead. Melissa, can you unmute and state your name and your affiliation?
Hi, good evening. Melissa Bumstead with Parents Against the Santa Susana Field Lab, and thank you for meeting with the community tonight. I have a few things that I wrote down. I put in the comments if Eric is still on the line of a local cancer support group that might be able to help his family. I would also say that he's welcome to reach out to Parents Against Santa Susana Field Lab because we've set up meal trains for groups and individuals before. So I'm devastated to hear that his family is going through that. I did want to address one thing. I agree with what Jenny said, and I appreciate you guys listening to that. I know it can be hard to listen. So good job. Mr. Becker, not too long ago, former Cal EPA Secretary Jared Blumenfeld said on record several times that the SSFL is dangerous to the community and that the contamination is reaching the community and causing health concerns. And I'm just concerned that DTSC has maybe changed its position on that. I'm not sure why that would contradict, why DTSC would contradict something that the Cal EPA Secretary said so recently. And if there's new data now showing that he was in fact wrong. And then I'll bring up my second question after that. But this whole statement about the contamination not harming anyone off site. We've heard that 1,000 times, and it's not effective. I'll just be blunt about that. It is not changing opinions from the community about the contamination, and it makes me feel personally like if the DTSC can't see that glaring problem, how can we even be on the same page towards working towards a solution? You know, if we can't even see that same issue, that the contamination is harming the community. And again, you're very well aware of the federally funded epidemiological study that showed the 60% higher cancer incidence rate. We brought lots of information to the DTSC that it continues to ignore if it's not in the benefit of the polluters. That is not helpful to the community. And I think as long as that statement keeps getting repeated, or even is the basis of the facts that the DTSC is bringing to the community, there's not going to be resolution between us and the DTSC. That is a foundational issue that we are not going to be able to move past if the DTSC cannot see the harm of these extremely dangerous and toxic contaminants impacting our community. And it also makes me feel like, how can you hear us if you're not listening to that main concern that so many people have called in, so many families have been impacted? Maybe because it's the work that Jenny and I do, and because my daughter's a cancer survivor, we're contacted all the time by people. I mean, you guys, I know you read our Facebook page, so you can look at the most recent one that we have over 90 comments of people saying, I have an autoimmune disease. I have an autoimmune disease. Everyone in my family has an autoimmune disease. Everyone on my street has an autoimmune disease. And this isn't normal. We know that. So I need DTSC to really question what your goal is, because you cannot protect human health if you don't see the problem. My second issue regarding groundwater specifically is the Boeing covenant. That was, I believe, last year or the year before, that essentially says that because no one is drinking the groundwater directly from the Santa Susana Field Lab, Boeing is not going to be required to clean it up to any time frame, as far as I can tell from reading that document. That doesn't make sense to me. That's not beneficial. I don't see any benefit to anybody except Boeing to not have the groundwater cleaned up, especially when that was a requirement of I believe the 2007 agreement, but certainly of the 2010. And that Boeing had started the water remediation. We know from DTSC's own statements that it will take centuries to clean the groundwater. So I don't understand why we're not starting that sooner. That's something I'd really like to see the DTSC go into detail with the reasoning and the timetables for getting the groundwater under the site remediated. Thank you.
Melissa, I can explain the land use covenant that was put on groundwater. That was a precautionary measure that was agreed to, basically to prevent anybody from drilling any wells or using water on the SSFL property for any type of potable water uses or any other uses. So basically that puts a prohibition on it. It is not meant to impact the cleanup of groundwater. Cleanup of groundwater will still occur, and as areas get cleaned up, they can be released out of that land use covenant. So that isn't like, it's like a layered covenant on top of, you know, some other things that are out there. I mean, obviously there's the conservation easement out there, which, you know, prohibits certain uses. This land use covenant does the same thing and prevents anybody on site from using groundwater. That's the purpose of it. And so it was placed on there as a precautionary measure and just to layer on the property to make sure there was no inappropriate use until groundwater cleanup was complete. It is not meant to impact the timing of the cleanup or the rate at which the cleanup will occur or the type of cleanup that will occur. So hopefully that clarifies, and we're happy to discuss that more with you for sure.
Yeah, the recordation of a land use covenant over a contaminated groundwater plume is standard practice in our cleanups, and we record those land use covenants to prevent the exact thing that we've heard many people concerned about, which is using groundwater, contaminated groundwater for drinking water. And so that land use covenant is in place to protect these types of concerns. Like if Boeing were to sell the land or try to drill a private well to serve their own needs or what have you, there's a land use covenant that's been executed so that even if the land.
I'm sorry, but
what's your question?
Well, Is my understanding, and I'm a little fuzzy on this, so maybe this is how you can help clarify it as well, that is the groundwater going to be used for dust mitigation measures during any part of the cleanup? Was that part of the reason why the covenant was created, was to prevent the groundwater from being used for dust mitigation? Because that would be very helpful.
I don't know the source. I don't think it was ever contemplated that they would be using contaminated groundwater for dust mitigation. They have water. Boeing has water at the site from I think from the Golden State water supplier. Is that correct? Anybody else on my technical team?
No, offhand, I can't remember all the provisions of it right now, but it was just meant to prevent use of any or consumption or contact with exposure to contaminated groundwater.
Yeah,
on the site.
It's to close off a human exposure pathway, Melissa. So, but it does not affect the cleanup decisions. It does not allow them to not clean up the groundwater and to treat the plume.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Valisa, who is our next person with their hand raised, please?
Yes, we have Caden Kavanaugh. Caden, can you please unmute and state your name and affiliation?
Yes, hello, I'm Caden Kavanaugh. I'm unaffiliated. I just had a quick question about kind of outreach for these meetings. I'm curious, how is the DTSC currently going about making stakeholders aware of these meetings, and how do you plan on making more stakeholders aware between this meeting and the upcoming workshops?
Okay, thank you for that question. So there's a couple of ways to stay in touch. The primary way is if you go to the DTSC webpage for our Santa Susana site, you can sign up for our e-list. And so I'm the public participation manager. So any public engagement workshops or meetings, I will send announcements via mail and to anyone that signed up on our e-list. And then we also work with our Office of Communications that also does additional social media postings, etc. And then based on the type of engagement, we also do ads in newspapers and in other ways. But the easiest way to stay in touch would be to sign up for our e-list, because any meeting or any engagement that we do will definitely be mailed to the stakeholders on our mailing list and to any stakeholders signed up for our e-list. And if you want to sign up via our webpage, you can do that. And if you want to send me an email, then I can manually add you to both. And our webpage is a great source of site and project information. And so anything that we announce for the site, we do post on our webpage. And then we do have documents that go additional places, like EnviroStore, for example. But if you're signed up for our e-list, you'll get notifications for anything that's uploaded to the webpage as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. And for those of you who are still wanting to send feedback, if you want to raise your hand, then you can add your input here at this meeting. You could also go to our DTSC SSFL web homepage, and the survey for Groundwater U is still live and will remain live throughout the workshop. So you can also add additional questions there. If you have any questions or input that you want to add after this public meeting is over, you can still submit them that way, or you can also send us an email, and I will have that information presented on the last slide before we end the meeting. And we have about 45 minutes before the end of the meeting. So with that said, we'll go to the next person with their hand raised. Valisa, who do we have next?
Yes, we have Adam Salkin. Adam, can you unmute, state your name and your affiliation so you can ask your question?
Yes, hi, my name's Adam Salkin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I've been involved for many, many years, also been to hundreds of meetings. And I just have to, I wasn't going to talk or ask a question today, but I just wanted to come in and second what Melissa Bumstead and Jenny Knack are saying. It's very disappointing to hear. And, part of me wants to believe because perhaps there are new DTSC people that don't know the background and haven't read through the, thousands or hundreds of thousands of pages. But the idea of you telling people that there is no offsite contamination that's affecting anybody, when we all know that surface water has shown elevated levels coming down off the site. We all know that there's been wells that have shown elevated levels of radionuclides, and that Boeing has bought property back or bought property from Brandeis related to groundwater and other issues of contamination. We all know that soil samples have been taken off-site in many areas circling the site that have shown elevated levels of radiation by developers, by EPA, so on and so forth. So when you say that there is no contamination, or infer that even, it doesn't make you look like you know what you're talking about. And again, maybe it's because you're new, but it's just it doesn't make any sense. So there's so many things that I have to say about this. Again, I don't want to take up everybody's time now. There's lots of people that want to speak, but the list is quite long. And we've been in meetings with the EPA talking about the, all the accidents that happened up there, and the EPA telling us that, of course, the contamination has gone off site. So, I just wanted to chime in with the many, many years and hundreds of meetings that we've talked about this at. And so from Blumenfeld all the way back to Gerard Abrams and Norm Riley, I mean, we're just talking about all of these years of messaging that right now, when you say the things you're saying, it's just the opposite is what is able to be backed up. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Valisa, who is our next person?
Right now, Jamie, we don't have any new hands raised, but we do have Christina Walsh. She does have her hand raised. And now we also have Jeannie Knack, but Christina had her hand raised first to begin.
Okay, Christina, can you please unmute yourself, and then you can provide your input again.
Yes, hi, thank you. I've been listening and making notes, and I wanted to make a few clarifications. I'm a little concerned about this. I'm very concerned about the map showing the plume, and this idea that we're still having a discussion that it's just stable and the Northwest, where we've all sat through, and Adam, I think, filmed the meeting where the area in the Northwest where they declared it was clean was simply where they didn't have a well. The Woolsey fire burned, first of all, it started at Santa Susana, and it burned 70% of the site. So we cannot pretend, it is disrespectful to all of us to pretend that the only fate and transport, everything that burned then meant that there was no vegetation. And so there was erosion, and now we have a lot of rain instead of a lot of drought. So there's lots of reasons, because we're here because we're concerned about our safety. And that's what you told us the mission was. So, and for clarification, Thomas Mack wrote and was funded by defense lawyers in writing Cancers in the Urban Environment. And Cindy Mays, a parent of one of the pediatric cancer victims, in this case, retinoblastoma, she had to fight with him, and he still wouldn't include her daughter in that study. So if you don't include the people with cancer in the study where you're looking for cancer, of course, it's all going to go the other way. So when we see fires and we see seeps on all of your maps, and now we see massive runoff, and then we still find out that they're not sampling, there's never enough water at outfall 2. So we know they're not looking for the purpose of finding things. And it is just mind-boggling, truly, that we're still reading things like no known source in this area nearby for exceedances of europium, plutonium. And this is all where we've been told to be quiet because there's nothing to see here. And now you're still telling us to rely when we've seen community after community be lied to, as well as this one. Don't we deserve better? So I officially request that the workshop about fate and transport specifically address the Woolsey fire as an active and litigated and confirmed migration pathway that meant that everything that was on the site was in the air and then fell on the ground and then ran with water downstreams. And then we all know about the fractured bedrock that you're going to talk about in workshop 1. So we need to see this from a perspective of safety. I'm heartbroken to hear of another generation. That's now 4 generations. I've interviewed hundreds of workers when I had the museum that all talked about the dangers, the hazards, the accidents, the 30 uranium fires, and denials and threats to their pensions. So when I hear now that we're not sure what's going on because it's super green and there's flowers, it's very frustrating. So it isn't so strange that you hear a lack of trust coming from the community. This can all be repaired because we did have trust when we had leadership, and this isn't your fault, but this is a very typical and cyclical pattern of change the face over time and then ask a brand new audience questions that don't make any sense to them instead of notifying them of what's there. You saw on your wheel, your little color wheel says people are interested in radiation. So I suggest that your groundwater topics not be limited to chemicals because that is not the case. And the chemicals are very hazardous. And when you burn, I know I'm taking too much time, but there is no one else. I'm on round 2. So I think that my input is relevant after 20 years and hundreds. I might be close to 1,000 meetings now. So don't be surprised if we are frustrated when you're telling us now after decades that you're not sure if there's anything wrong, when no effort to look where communities have are the receptors, that has not been done. The only thing that has been done is everything to stamp that down. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And we have 2 new hands raised, so we'll come back to you, Jenny, if that's okay.
It's all good.
Okay, who's our next person, Valisa?
Yes. We have William Preston Bowling. Can you unmute your phone and tell us your name and your affiliation to ask your question?
Hi, it's William Bowling, and I saw the plume map, which is interesting, but I would like for the Groundwater U in the future to look at some of the other offsite maps. Like we have some of the wells, OS 10, which is on the Brandeis property, and that had some high hits of radionuclides in the past. Also OS 21. So OS stands for offsite. So if you look at some offsite wells, like I think the plumes that you're looking at here are just like the RDs and the PZs and, you know, stuff like that. But I would like to, in the future groundwater use, include all the OS wells, which stand for offsite. And I think there's some interesting data there that we could kind of use for mapping of some other constituents that are maybe migrating off the site.
Thank you. Thank you, William. Valisa, who's our next person? And thank you for everyone who is posting into the Q&A. Everyone has access to see and view the questions and the answers there. And then we'll also take that and roll that into the planning for the future workshops and meetings as well. Valisa, who's our next person?
Yes. We have Michaela Partington. Can you please unmute, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question?
Hi, my name is Michaela. I'm a community member. I am concerned that the groundwater will affect nearby communities, and I am concerned that the health risks are not being looked into of potentially off-site contamination. And I'm wanting to know what can be done to ensure that the communities do not continue to be affected by the toxins.
Thank you.
And also the cleanup of the Santa Susana Field Lab.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you. Valisa, who is our next person with raised hand?
Then we can go to Janie Knack. We don't have any new hands at the moment.
Okay.
And I'm going to dial down my adrenaline because I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anyone on the call. One, I need to fact check. Adam fact checked me, and GSW is not using at times 57%. They're using 67%. That's closer to 3/4 groundwater. It's important for us to address, and I'm sorry for my lowballing of that figure. The second to last thing I want to address is the connections between the Area 1 burn pit remediation that starts in March and groundwater remediation, or lack thereof. Theoretically, there is a potential, because the Area 1 burn pit does not take into account human health concerns and only is based on ecological risks. There's no human health concerns used because it was an ISE and an emergency action. It didn't have to undergo CEQA. So they didn't have to take into account public comment or environmental impact. And they didn't base that remediation of one of the most extensively contaminated areas on site on human health standards. My concern is that a partial remediation of the Area 1 burn pit starting in less than 2 months is going to partially remediate, meaning leaving some of the contamination on site, disturbing the soil, and thus potentially mobilizing contaminated soil. And so that we may see more contamination moving from that area that could either be routed to Silvernail Pond, which then has the potential to infiltrate the groundwater, or could increase contamination going through the outfalls. So I'm hoping that this second round of Groundwater U cannot keep all of these actions and activities separate, but can connect the dots like the community is attempting to do. People who fear for the public health impacts of actions or incomplete actions at the site. We understand that the DTSC has made a statement that yes, the Area 1 burn pit will be returned to, but we don't know when, and we don't have sufficient evidence right now in writing that remediation will not allow disturbed contaminated soils offsite. And so for us, that is directly linked to a groundwater and stormwater issue. We actually wish, and this is weird, but just so it's on record for both forums, that groundwater and stormwater weren't put into different categories as if they're not connected, because they are through the seeps and through infiltration into the groundwater. That's how it's recharged. So that's another point. And my last point, I hope, for all of our sakes, is that the settlement agreement that DTSC came to in secret negotiations with Boeing without environmental review or public input, had the effect of limiting the soil remediation. And as long as those limits are set on limiting soil volume remediation, because we are talking about over the decades disturbing soil and potentially mobilizing contaminated soil, there's the remaining potential for groundwater and surface water to continue to be recontaminated. And I'm fearing that we're going to go into these Groundwater U classes where we're told that all the groundwater is locked in the sandstone and that we don't have to worry about it, that it's not coming through our pipes and it's not coming through our stormwater that our kids play in the seeps, but yet kids in our community are getting cancer at crazy rates. I mean, yes, this is what I focus my attention on, but my kids' classmates in jujitsu are, 8-year-olds are getting cancer. And then their friend, they know somebody else, another toddler who got cancer. Last week, there's 3 more kids that we became aware of in a relatively small community that are getting cancer. We want the issues addressed and we're excited to see new faces, but we want you to be eager to connect the dots like we are. So there's a compartmentalization of data where they say, oh, this is groundwater data. We're going to do this over here. This is stormwater data. We're going to do this over here. We're not going to allow crosstalk. So I'm hoping that those walls come down and we talk about data that conflicts with the messages that were sent to our communities 12 years ago. Thank you so much. And I'll try to stop.
Thank you, Jenny.
I just wanted to address I wanted to address some of your comments regarding the Area 1 burn pit cleanup.
Great.
So with respect to the Area 1 burn pit cleanup, it was as you stated correctly, it was an ISE order or an imminent and substantial endangerment order based on what we call eco-risk. Eco-risk cleanup is also beneficial to human health risk, but the reason it wasn't an imminent and substantial endangerment order based on human health risk is because humans are not allowed in the Area 1 burn pit area of the site. So they're not considered at an imminent risk under the law. I understand that, the Area 1 burn pit is still like a risk to humans, but for the purposes of getting that particular site cleaned up as soon as possible, we used eco-risk for our imminent and substantial endangerment order, but it's still beneficial to human health to have that cleanup, proceed. The other thing I wanted to address on your comments with respect to the stormwater during the cleanup, I'm going to be frank with you, I share that concern. As we're mobilizing, as the cleanup is underway, and as soil becomes mobilized in stormwater, there's concern that soil will be basically suspended in stormwater and will go off-site, or as you pointed out in your video, to the Silvernail Pond, which is not lined. So we share in that concern. We have asked—
line the pond and do a full cleanup at that area instead of waiting, instead of putting years between a full cleanup and a partial cleanup, because that's presenting a health risk. And I hate that. I don't want community members to say, oh, Jenny was advocating for not doing a cleanup at Area 1 burn pit. That's not what I want, but we need a full cleanup done.
Yeah.
Not to increase the risk to public health, because even though you say we did an ecological cleanup at that area because humans aren't there, it is on a hill. That water is flowing off site. When it rained last year, we went to the border of the site, collected samples, got hits. It's not staying on site. That would defy the laws of gravity. So
we're aware that it's on a hill, and I share in your concern, frankly. And so there is, I can tell you what protections are in place to address those concerns. So as with all of the cleanups that will happen, they are required to get from the Regional Water Quality Control Board a construction general permit for stormwater. The construction general permit generally requires, just in general terms, requires best management practices be put in place to prevent suspension of soils. It adds added requirements. So when rain is forecasted, they have to do certain tarping activities. And we have DTSC staff that will be on site every day that they're doing cleanup. And they are required as part of their work plan to comply with their construction general permit from the water board that is meant to address those concerns. Those are the requirements. I can't guarantee what people will do. All I can say is that those are the protections that we have in place because we share those concerns with you.
When DOE did their demolitions, I think 2 years ago, they didn't follow their SOPs. They didn't use the water cannons they said they were going to use to dampen the dust. And so that's why a partial cleanup still equates with a public health risk to us, because while we can sit here and say, hey, we've got a plan for BMPs, what we have seen with the contractors is that they're not implemented. And so a partial cleanup equals public health threats. And so
I hear you.
For this, all we want to all I'm asking is that for Groundwater U, DTSC acknowledge that there may be an increased contamination of groundwater and stormwater through current remediation.
Yeah,
and just not address it.
We are returning, like an important part of this is we are returning to Area 1 burn pit once we get the final soil cleanup decisions approved. We are returning to Area 1 burn pit for a full cleanup. What's being referred to as a partial cleanup is just the part that we could justify under the imminent and substantial endangerment so that we could get that cleaned up as soon as possible to like mitigate that risk, that ongoing risk. And then also, you know, I just want to know, I appreciate what you said about the connectivity between surface water and groundwater. I was a stormwater lawyer before I came to DTSC. I represented an environmental NGO. And so it is frustrating for me too to see that the law is bifurcated in such a way that it treats groundwater and stormwater so separately. Like the Supreme Court didn't start recognizing the connection between surface water and groundwater until very recently. And so our laws are very bifurcated, that kind of force us to make decision documents about groundwater and surface water differently. And in fact, we have like different jurisdiction, right? So you'll see that we're working on, well, we're working with the water board, but we're working on these groundwater cleanup decision documents, and they are separate from the stormwater, But I just want to thank you for your comment that we do need to see the stormwater problems holistically with the groundwater concerns. And so we hear your comments, and we're going to work to address, and really the point of this meeting is, as you said, we don't want to have the Groundwater U filled with information that's not relevant to you, which is the purpose of this listening session. So thank you for your comments.
I just want to say that I understand that for points of like legally they are separate,
but we need to look at the whole picture.
Well, and intellectually, theoretically, and how it affects the public, they are very much connected. And so we see it at that separation that is utilized by DTSC to separate the topics is a way to do something with one hand and ignore it with the other. And that is doing our community a disservice. So regardless of, you know, how the law handles it, that is being exploited to our detriment. And so we don't want to show up to any more meetings and hear that that is beyond the purview of any given meeting, because all of these things are happening at one spot in one geological area, and DTSC has oversight for all of it.
Yeah, I hear your frustrations on that, and we will be working to see the site holistically.
Thanks. Sorry for gabbing on.
No worries. No need to apologize. That's what we're here for. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Sarah. And Valisa, who's our next person? And we have about 20 minutes left in the meeting. So if anyone still would like to type into the Q&A, feel free to do so. And you can also visit our webpage to contact us via the survey. And I'll show contact information on the last slide before we end the meeting tonight.
Okay, Jamie, we have Chris Rowe. He had his hand up to speak again. Chris, go ahead and unmute and start asking your question.
Okay, actually, I don't want to ask a question. I want to make some statements here based on other comments. Number one, I would, because I didn't have time, it's very hard to go back and forth, be listening and taking notes and going into your document library. So number one, the DOE and the federal EPA did former interviews of workers that worked in Area 4 when the nuclear research was done. And I think that you guys all should be aware of that. And I interviewed 20 of the former employees, the DOE, well, they were Atomics International and North American Aviation employees, including the senior engineer and the junior engineer on the sodium reactor experiment. And there's so much misinformation. People use the term meltdown. There was no meltdown. There was a cladding failure. There was a DOE expert panel meeting on that in 2009, which is on the DOE website. They brought in experts, and the senior engineer was actually there. He spoke. That was Jim Owens. I have an interview of Jim on I've been named by one of the people in the community, the Meltdown Denier. So I created a YouTube channel called Meltdown Denier, where I interviewed Jim Owens, not specifically on the sodium reactor experiment, but it was supposed to be a living history of what work he did. And prior to, like, for example, he was on the first launch of the Nautilus nuclear reactor vessel before they turned it over to the Navy, and where he went after. But the bottom line is I also interviewed the junior engineer on the SRE in 1959, who was a health physicist. So what I'm saying to you is, number one, you have people that were not scientists who commented to DOE and EPA. They didn't understand, and they'd use the word things like meltdown, number one. Whereas the scientists, when they weighed into these interviews, would give very technical, detailed information. Another thing, I want to make it very clear to you all that I have always supported a human health risk-based cleanup to a residential standard, which I believe the 2007 consent order was supposed to implement. And it is my opinion that the only reason we aren't there today is because of the litigation by several of the nonprofits that have held this up and held up DOE's EIR. And the EPA, when you guys were doing your lookup table values, the EPA looked at 3 locations north of the 118 freeway, Lang Ranch, and Bridle Path. One is off of the Chumash area in Thousand Oaks, and one is in Simi Valley. That they did their radiological sampling there. And then I was taken with 2 other stakeholders by DTSC employees up above the 118 freeway and shown why DTSC was not going to do background studies there. It was too close to the freeway. And so you would get false levels, elevated levels of chemicals from the 118 freeway. So what I want to point out is the goal of the lookup table values was to stay within 5 miles of the SSFL site for the background studies, to stay within the same geological formations that were on the Santa Susana site, so that you would have what's called the normal radionuclides. And then the federal EPA did step outs. They went out to Thousand Oaks. They went to Santa Clarita. They went to Topanga Canyon State Park. And they looked at those sites for radionuclides to make sure whether they were any different from what they were seeing at Lang Ranch, Bridle Path, and the other location, Rocky Peak area. And they determined that they weren't any different at distance. And that's why it was okay to use those 3 sites for their background studies. Now, one of the areas, as I said, was way out in Thousand Oaks. So the people that are stating that when the Woolsey fire blew, that the radionuclides that were found off-site, number one, they didn't go through chain of custody.
That's not true.
And number two, that chain of custody, I'm talking through agents, and I would appreciate not being spoken over. I didn't speak over anyone. The point I'm making is the radionuclides that were found on site, you'd have to know what the background is in those areas, because we have high naturally occurring levels of radionuclides, uranium and thorium in our soil locally, and other radionuclides, and the potential for radon in our homes and heavy metals and everything like that locally. So the bottom line is, that's why I've always wanted human risk-based cleanup and everything. And we need to be better educated. You've got a whole new generation of people, not only new generation of staff that I'm looking at on this page, but a new generation of people that are coming in, people like Melissa and Jenny Knack that were not around, whereas people, I have to give credit to people like Bill Bowling that spoke earlier, Adam Socken that spoke, Christina Walsh that spoke. Christina, Bill Bowling, me, we were all in Area 4 with the federal EPA, with DOE, DTSC, when the radiological surveys were going on. I know that Christina went off-site and went to the off-site background sites with these agencies when they did the background studies. And in conclusion, I would like to point out one of my concerns about the lookup table values. The EPA brought in a technical expert, and what they did is they cut off the 2 tails to give what's called a 95% USL. In my opinion, they should have never cut off the upper levels of the radionuclides, because in my opinion, that was naturally occurring data that was found at Lang Ranch and Bridle Path and other locations. And so you could have had an upper boundary of naturally occurring radionuclides, number one. Number two, we were being told at the time by a stakeholder that worked at the site that they should be checking the drainages at Lang Ranch and Bridle Path and other places, and they never sampled in the drainages. My understanding is that these radionuclides and other chemicals and stuff could go into the drainages and collect, and EPA didn't collect in the drainages where they could have collected. So that was another failure that was pointed out by Dr. I'm blanking right now. He was a member of the SSFL CAG. But anyway, the bottom line is, I want this site cleaned up too. I don't want it delayed by further litigation. I appreciate all of you being there today. And I really was hoping we were going to have a presentation rather than just a listening session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And we have about 7 minutes left in the meeting. We have 2 more people with their hands raised, so we're just going to take the last 2 people. We'll start with Julie, and then we'll go to Christina Walsh, and then we're going to wrap up the meeting so I can show you a couple of more slides before we end. And then anyone that didn't have a chance to say everything, or if you have some more thoughts after this meeting is over, then I'll provide some additional ways for you to be able to reach out and give us some more input. So, and then Velisa, thank you so much for your help. Thank you everyone that was here on our technical team to provide help, and thank you to the public for your concerns. We will do our best to put as much of this into the groundwater workshops as possible. and create or edit and modify any current documents and resources that we have. So we'll go ahead and take Julie Korenstein, if you can unmute yourself.
I did. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, it's taking me all this time to look up some information, and I don't know that it's pertinent or helpful. I thought that you had said, or someone had said, that the water coming off of the site is not contaminated or would be a problem, whether it gets blended into drinking water. What I found was the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, and it has to do with the Boeing Company and the discharger information. So I believe just in December, this last month, the discharging, it's for a 5-year period from this December to November 30th, 2028. And they're allowing discharges into Bell Creek, Arroyo Simi, Dayton Canyon Creek, Bell Creek, and so all of a sudden, finding this information again, which I had read a month or so ago, that is actual water discharged from the Santa Susana Field Lab into these creeks, into the Arroyo Simi. Now, am I to understand that the water that's being discharged from the SSFL is not contaminated, does not get into any groundwater, any wells, and into drinking water? I mean, I have the information right here. I'm sure you're all aware of that. It's, just to tell you, it's the NPDES number, and it's CA0001309, CI number 6027. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. That's their NPDES stormwater permit. So the Santa Susana Field Laboratory is covered under an NPDES permit, the one that you just read out that was just renewed by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And that regulates their surface water discharges. That is the permit that sets the applicable limits for chemicals leaving the site in surface water. What we were saying is that the groundwater on the Santa Susana site, we do not have data to suggest that those groundwater plumes are moving off site, with the exception of that TCE plume that there was a map of earlier. So the stormwater does go off site, as you pointed out. The stormwater, the NPDES permit regulates the stormwater.
And is the stormwater not contaminated, or is it contaminated?
Based on their sampling results, based on the sampling results that they've taken, most of the water is not contaminated. Julie, were you able to attend the stormwater tour?
No.
Okay, so they have a massive stormwater treatment system that treats their stormwater to basically drinking water standards and has a flow rate. I don't remember what the flow rate is right now, but they can treat like 10,000 gallons a minute. It's a very high-tech stormwater treatment system. They have had exceedances.
Who is doing the treatment? I'm sorry, who?
I believe it's Boeing's treatment system.
Yeah.
At the site?
Yeah, it's on site.
And it treats, excuse me, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to, there's so much information, I'm trying to understand it. It treats both chemicals and nuclides, radioactive material?
I don't recall off the top of my head what they're required to sample for in their discharges, but that's the permit that regulates stormwater discharges. They have had exceedances of their stormwater permit at different outfalls. I think at outfalls 9 and 10. So there is information, though they do have to report that publicly to the Regional Water Quality Control Board. When it rains, they have to collect samples. They have to report that data is available on the SMARTS system. That's the SMARTS is an acronym that honestly, despite working in stormwater for like a decade, I can barely remember.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you keep saying they. Are you talking about Boeing?
Yeah, so Boeing has to sample and Boeing has to
They
submit.
sample it and they are the ones that transmit the information to the regional board? No one
That's
else?
correct.
There's no independent?
Their contractor collects the samples and submits the data.
And just to be clear, that's how all stormwater is managed in the state of California. It is a self-reporting system. They are required to comply. The water board does have the authority to take their own samples if they want to.
And did they do that in this case, or it was, they relied on Boeing having their own subcontractor that they pay to give that information? Does anyone verify it? Excuse me, that's what I need to know. Does anyone verify that it's actual, the information is truthful and not slanted at all?
It goes to a lab. There's a chain of custody form, but we can't, we didn't take the samples. And I do want to leave time for other people to talk, but thank you for your comments. And I've written them down for further response.
I only wish there was someone else verifying it. I don't really feel comfortable. It's the Fox verifying how many chickens there are in the chicken shed. Sorry, I'm wearing off. I'm wearing out.
Thank you, Julie. And just for the sake of the listening session, we know that we're right up at time. So we had one more person, but now we have two. So we're gonna take two people. Christina, we don't want to limit anyone's time, so please be brief so we can end the meeting on time. We'll take Christina Walsh and then we have Marissa Lopez. Christina, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this evening's discussion. I will be brief. I wanted to make a request for, I think it is the third workshop that is supposed to talk about solutions. That the NASA, I was fortunate to be able to look at is that the case? Groundwater remediation. Yes, I was fortunate to be able to look at the rotational activity that is going on for treatment on the NASA portion of the site. And I wanted to request that be included in the April 4th third workshop. I think it's very important. One of the frustrations for so many of us waiting decades is the lack of activity. And while I can completely appreciate the concern about partial cleanups and the risks during remediation activity, dust control is primary. A guy with a hose is really the most important thing that has to be budgeted every single time. And it sounds silly, but to still be begging for that to make the solution part of the solution instead of part of the problem is crucial. And I would really appreciate the opportunity to discuss solutions instead of, and I understand people feel it's important to deny things for the biggest company in the world, but I think that, recent events are showing safety is not always on their mind. That is clear with the 737, and that is clear here. But I do think that looking at actual proactive events that remove mass of constituents of concern that cause the potential health problems that people have so many legitimate concerns about. And so I request that be an item on the agenda for that April 4th meeting. And then also just thank you for the opportunity to hear us all. And I truly, most sincerely hope that you will consider all of the words from all of us when you move forward with these three workshops in a way so that we don't have, and I heard I really appreciated Julie's questions, and and also new people. To me, it's just terrible when we see the increase in population with all these new developments and all these new people that are talking about heartbreaking stories. The problem is not over, and we need to stop acting like it's over when the solution hasn't started. So we need to make it easier for new people to understand this. And I appreciate your website, but there's a lot to know, and it's pretty overwhelming for someone new. So maybe a section each time for these new people, because listening to all of us go on and on probably isn't very interesting to them, except frustrating, because they're dealing with new impacts that they have health concerns about. So we need to be talking about how these chemical and radionuclide constituents of concern have an impact on the constituents that live around the site. And they have a real life impact. And that's what we need to focus on here. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Christina. And Marissa Lopez, can you please unmute yourself and state your comment or concern? And you can unmute yourself with *6, or I can do it for you.
Got it.
Oh, okay.
Hi there. My name is Marissa Lopez. I'm just getting over a cold, so excuse my froggy voice. I am one of those families who has been affected by it. My daughter has glioblastoma brain cancer, and I first wanted to say thank you for providing the community with this listening tour and with the ability to share our concerns. And secondly, I would just really urge you to not only listen, but to take action on that. What I've heard loud and clear after listening to other folks participating in this call is there's not a lot of trust, both with Boeing primarily, but even with DTSC, because of past actions where promises were made, not only to do the cleanup, but to do a full cleanup. And we are very concerned that that is not actually going to happen. So please not only hear us loud and clear, but please do something about it. Secondly, I do find it somewhat offensive when I hear folks, I believe her name is Chris Rowe, who is mentioning something about new folks getting engaged in this issue, because folks are continuously newly being affected by the Santa Susana Field Lab and the toxins that are spread into our community, and they do affect our families. And oftentimes, unfortunately, people are not aware of things that they don't realize affect them. So we become very aware and very engaged in these toxic issues when it affects our families, especially. And if you hear misinformation being heard, I appreciate that you correct some of those things that are being displayed. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out as a family member who is affected by this, newly affected by this, I guess, in the last 3 years. It's important that we encourage all of our community to participate in this. And I do appreciate that you are providing these listening tours as an opportunity to do that. And I also would like to reiterate that these listening tours are an opportunity to give some base information, and that not everybody knows the full background, and could take, a full day each time to do that. But if you could just provide maybe a 10-minute background and allow a couple of stakeholders to provide, 3 or 4 minutes each, I think that would also be conducive to not only, giving good pertinent information out there, but gathering information from the community. So thanks again for hearing us, and I look forward to participating in the future.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And thank you everyone for your comments and your concerns and your input. We're gonna start to close the meeting. If anyone would like to submit additional information, I will share that with you shortly. We've gotten through all of the raised hands. We have Julie. Julie, I'm gonna wrap up the meeting and then I'll stay on for your final question. This slide is a reminder of the upcoming workshop titles, the dates and the times for the groundwater workshops, and the site visit that will be on April 6th at the Santa Susana Field Laboratory site. You can visit our DTSC events page to register for the workshops. So if you just visit the link that's on the screen, you can go and scroll through the dates in calendar order, and then you can sign up for these dates. You can also sign up on our DTSC SSFL homepage as well. Sorry, my screen was frozen. DTSC released the final program environmental impact report that you heard a little about on this meeting. It's the PEIR for SSFL in July 2023. The next steps include Boeing, NASA, and DOE to submit draft cleanup plans, which are decision documents describing how they will clean up their areas of responsibility. Each plan will have its own timeline, public notice, and public comment period. These cleanup plans will focus on soil and groundwater cleanup. The first groundwater decision document and public comment period is expected to begin later this year. Please visit our DTSC SSFL web homepage to access the groundwater survey if you would like to submit additional groundwater questions or topics. And remember that the survey will remain live throughout the workshop series. We also welcome you to submit any additional questions that are non-groundwater related to the new SSFL community survey that's going to remain live on the bottom of the homepage. If you have any questions, you can please submit them there. You can also feel free to email us, and you may also sign up to receive SSFL project updates by signing up for our e-list, also on the homepage. As a reminder, all stakeholder input received, including through the groundwater survey and this listening session, will be considered for the development of workshop content, upcoming groundwater decision document meeting materials, webpage FAQs, future meetings and workshops, or other relevant work products and communications. Please visit the DTSC SSFL web homepage, our public participation page, or EnviroStore. You can find additional resources and information, including site-wide information, air monitoring reports, project documents, cleanup plans, and more. This slide includes DTSC contact information for SSFL for more ways to stay connected. I will leave this slide up briefly, and I want to again thank everyone for your time and your participation this evening, and we look forward to seeing you at the upcoming groundwater workshop. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.